Sorry. It looks pretty good so far. Hopefully we're going to finish the book of Deuteronomy today. I'm going to pick up around chapter 30 if you want to turn there. And the end of this book is interesting. I've said that about every lesson, though, so there's some points to be made, but a lot of it will be somewhat redundant as Moses is sort of summing everything up. And he focuses on a couple of what I consider major themes. In chapter 30, they're talking about the idea of repentance and forgiveness again. If you remember last week, he was talking about, if you follow me, things will be great, there'll be blessings. But by the way, I think you're not going to follow me. And pretty much know you're going to turn away from me, and then it's going to be really bad. And he spelled that out. So the chapter begins with, it says, and when all these things come upon you, the blessings and the curse, which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among all the nations where the Lord your God has driven you, and return to the Lord your God, you and your children, and obey his voice in all that I command you, with all your heart and with all your soul, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have mercy on you. He'll gather you again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. That's a prophetic section, but it's not new. He said this before. God is basically saying, I'm going to put you in the land, going to give you everything you ever dreamed of, and you're going to mess it up by worshiping false gods. And when that happens, I'm going to allow other people to come in, take your land, take you, and you will be dispersed. Now, the interesting thing about that prophecy is that a lot of people think, well, that happened right away. It didn't. When they began to fall away from God and worship the local gods, one of the first groups you'll run into will be the Philistines. And the Philistines will come in, and, well, they're actually already there. The Philistines are to some people, they're a mysterious group, because some archaeologists have said that they're actually Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians were people that sailed around the Mediterranean, and they would set up settlements. They were big into trading, but if you're a trader on the open sea, you also need to be a strong military power because of pirates. And I mean, the Mediterranean was a big ocean, so where you have a big ocean, you have people in boats, and those people steal stuff from other people in boats. So you had pirates. Best known group were called the Cilician pirates. They were stationed somewhere either around Malta or North Africa. They gave Rome a hard time. But here are the Phoenicians. And you can trace these people way back. Most of their roots seem to be in Lebanon, which is just north of Israel. But they also had cities in the southern part of Israel. Interestingly enough, today, Gaza, which is where most of your Palestinians are living, was a Philistine area. Above that, you had around, I can't remember the city on the coast, but it was in Lebanon. And that was another Phoenician/Philistine area. Now, the reason we have Philistine as a name and you have Phoenicians as a name, the confusion is that they were probably the Phoenicians. And like I said, sailors, colonizers, and warriors. The Romans are the ones that sort of muddied the water, because when Rome came in, and we're talking around the 1st, 2nd century AD, they're the ones that truly dispersed the Jews. There had been previous dispersals with the Babylonians and the Assyrians, where the Babylonians took to Babylon, the Assyrians took them, and then the Assyrians eventually let them come home. But then the Greeks came. The Greeks did not disperse them. The Greeks just interpersed with them, forced them to speak the Greek language. And everything was done in Greek, which led to the Bible being written in Greek. Are these trick-or-treaters? Oh my goodness, I'm getting scared. We have some trick-or-treaters with us this morning.
Harvey, come on. Don't be shy. I don't know why. I'm like this. I only have two.
I only have two.
I'm just gonna take the leftover. Y'all can share it here if y'all
That's
want.
leftover. Go around.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's got something.
Oh, that's fine. If everybody's got one.
Oh, yeah.
Good morning.
Yeah, just do
I just gave mine away.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
We have one.
Go ahead.
Here you go.
That's so
Well, I'll
sweet.
give you one
Did you get?
too.
Oh, we'll let y'all keep one.
Y'all don't get sick off all of
Thank you.
That's the joy of Halloween.
Bye.
Thank you.
That was sweet.
Our trick-or-treaters. As I was saying, it is the Romans that sort of confuse things. Most archaeologists say these were Phoenicians. Where did we get the name Philistines then? Well, when the Romans came after the Greeks, they took the area, and eventually they will be the big dispersal, which I think is what's referred to here, because God is talking about he's going to send you all over the place. And he says, I'm going to do it. Well, there we see that this is God working, using people, and he used the Romans as a source of punishment. The early dispersals were regional. Like I said, they were in Babylon. They were places that they were familiar with. But the Romans sent them across the Mediterranean world. You will have Jewish colonies in Spain, in France, North Africa. You'll have some in Asia Minor, and you have a lot in Eastern Europe. And like I told you last week, this will become known as the Ashkenazi Jews in Germany, Eastern. When the Romans asked who owned this country before, someone said, well, the Philistines or the Philistias. And what they were doing was giving a Greek transliteration of the word Phoenicians. So you got Phoenicians transliterated into Greek, becomes Philistia. And so the Roman says, well, we will call it Palestine, which you think, wait a minute, what's going on? Phoenicia is a transliteration to Philistia, which is a transliteration to Palestine. And the Romans called it Palestine. And that's where we got that. That's why we have confusion today. The Palestinians say, this is our land. Well, it's not their land. They had some of the southern part around Gaza and some of the northern part, mostly in Lebanon. So that's our political geo lesson for the day. Palestine was a word that traced all the way back to Phoenicians, which the Phoenicians never colonized what we consider Israel. They were north and south of it. So when Palestinians say, well, you have a claim to our land, it's not a valid claim. But like I said, you won't hear that in history books anymore because our history books are politically correct. And we also have universities that are sensitive to the Palestinian order more so than the Israeli order. And that's just something that personally, as someone who studies history and the theology with it, it's like there seems to be a purposeful effort to play down Israel's role and their right to the state of Israel. And they base it on misinformation. So that might be our next section of Sunday school, is talking about how the Bible has been misinterpreted for political purposes. But I'm debating on that because if I get into politics, we'll be in big trouble. But anyway, that's the prophecy, and I think it's a very accurate prophecy. So the Lord says, I'll restore you from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you, because, like I said, the Romans scattered them everywhere. Now after that, he says, I'll bring you into the land, and I'll put all the curses that we talked about on your enemies and on the people who persecuted you. And he even says, I'll take a great delight in prospering you. And that's happened in Israel. In 1948, most of Israel was desert. By 1958, it was gardens. And like I said, we were there and we drove through areas that were mostly desert down by the Dead Sea. And yet in the same desert region, you see just yards and yards of beautiful green palm trees where they planted palm trees in the desert and irrigated it, and they grow. And yeah, I remember looking at those palm things and I thought, what are those palm trees for? And I realized, Brooks, that's dates, date palms. And, that's a big thing over there, if you like dates. Now, this section goes on to what I think is one of the themes. In verse 11, it says, for this commandment that I command you today is not too hard for you, neither is it far off. Now, there's just a little play on words here. He says, I'm telling you something that's not difficult. And by the way, it's not far away. In other words, you don't have to go far to understand this. I'm just telling you the truth. It's easy to understand, and it's a choice you have to make. In verse 15, he says, see, I've set before you today life and good, death and evil. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, as I command you, by loving the Lord, walking in his ways, keeping his commandments and his statutes. The three things, love God, walk in God's ways, keep the commandments. And there's your choice. Your choice. I'll declare to you today that you will surely perish. You should not get down. In verse 19, he says, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I've set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life, that you and your offspring may live. And it's, God is simply saying, folks, I'm not a dictatorial God. God, even though we think he is, and people accuse God of being so mean and gruff, he's saying, I'm giving you a choice. Simple as that. You can either live by the law or you can die by the law. Because if you live by it, you will prosper. If you don't, you will be dispersed, you will die, you'll be invaded, you'll be taken over. Now, to some, that seems harsh. It seems mean. In today's permissive society, we see this all the time where it's like, well, we ought to just let things pass. Be a peacemaker. I hear that all the time. Well, I'm going to be a peacemaker, but peacemaking does not mean giving in to evil. That's not peace. Look at our history. Neville Chamberlain. Y'all know who Neville Chamberlain was? He went to make peace with Hitler and famously came back and said, I found him to be a rather understandable and agreeable fellow. And everybody thought, well, that's great. We've got peace. And in a couple of years, massive war. The effort to make peace was, we will give you, first they gave them the Rhineland, which was part of France. It used to be called Alsace-Lorraine. Then they gave them the Sudetenland, which was part of Czechoslovakia, and they claimed it was German. Then they allowed them to take over Austria. The final straw was, every time they said, is that it? He said, oh yeah, that's all I want. Just trying to get Germany back as it used to be. It was never that. Then Poland. And when they invaded Poland, finally they said, folks, this is getting a little silly. We're going to take steps. Had Neville Chamberlain been a little tougher, we don't know. Probably there'd still been a war because Hitler was bound and determined. But Chamberlain started the passive way of just letting evil have its way. And it led to the death of millions of people. I don't know how well you study history. We always talk about the 6 million Jews. Oh, that was terrible. It was the Holocaust. It was terrible. But nobody ever talks about the millions of Slavic people that were killed. You see, those camps were full of Jews and Slavs. And Slavs were anybody who was from Eastern Europe. And that's Poles, that's Czechs, that was Hungarians, Romanians. Anybody that wasn't German was considered Slavic. And so they were put into camps and they were worked. They were treated better than the Jews because they were slave laborers. But then we don't think about what happened in Russia under Stalin. Stalin did his own persecution of the Jews. They still don't know how many people were killed in Russia. The estimate ranges anywhere from 20 million to 250 million. But there were no good records kept, but they just know that there's entire regions that were Jewish regions where when they went, the people were gone and nobody knows where they went. They just disappeared and they never came back. So if you start adding it up, you got 250 million here, you got 6 million there. Then you have innocent people killed in the war. That's civilians living in Europe, and they push that number close to 10 million. So, wait a minute, that's 10 million people. Well, then you got the soldiers who actually fought in the war. All the death and destruction that came simply because we didn't put our foot down and say, this is the law. This is what's right. Now, and this will sound political, but we fought World War II and we won. After that, you'd think the world would learn the lesson. Don't let evil rise. And yet look what happened. We fought a police state, our police state war in Korea. Do you know we're still at war with Korea? There was never a peace treaty signed. Next thing we do, we go to Vietnam. We fight in a civil war. And we lost. People say, oh, we didn't lose, we just left. Well, we left because we were losing, because we were killing millions of people. At least 2 million people were killed in North Vietnam, and they just wouldn't stop fighting. All over the world, We have just finished the longest war in American history, 20 years in Afghanistan. Could we have beaten Afghanistan? Well, I think if we'd gone all out, we could.
Really fighting them.
Yeah, we were fighting. Really, we fought about 10 different wars in Afghanistan because each warlord had his own army and his own section. They worked together, but usually they were territorial. But we said, well, we're just going to do this with air power. Great. We killed a lot of people, but look what we got for it. The Afghans, they wanted to kill us, but they enjoyed maiming us as much as they did killing us. That's why you see all these guys with no arms and legs. We never took decisive action in Afghanistan. And what I mean by that, and I know you're going to think I'm evil, but we haven't fought an all-out war since World War II. We go in, we slap them on the wrist, and we bring home maimed and dead Americans. And look what we got now in Afghanistan. No change. Look at Iraq. You know, everybody said, oh, we fought all out there. No, we didn't. We went in, we fought to a certain point, and then we quit. And we let it go. Iraq now is more of a puppet state of Iran. I won't get any further into the geopolitics of the world. It's just that we're not following God's plan for peace. And peace, I know it sounds moronic, oxymoron, but peace often comes through war, and you have to stand on something. And God is saying, choose. And if you choose the commandments, that means that you have to wage a war against evil. That's what we're to do. Now, is that spiritual evil? Here's where it's going to sound contradictory. God doesn't call us to be spiritual warriors, as you think. I know you think, wait a minute, what about spiritual warfare? We're engaged in spiritual warfare just about 24/7. God doesn't call us to kill demons or to kill the devil. I get so upset when people, you know, they get their shirts and t-shirts to say, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And it's a very martial attitude. And it sounds good. It makes you feel all macho. But God is the warrior. Just like he says here. I mean, countless times he'll say, I will go and fight. I will wipe out your enemies. We are to be the children of God, the people of God. But I used to tell my students, they would get so upset because, well, I say, no, God doesn't call you to go and find evil and fight evil because you will lose. This shocks people, but folks, we're no match for Satan. He is smarter than we are. He's seen stuff. He knows stuff. He's got better connections. So what are we supposed to do? We're the people that go in and pray for the people that are under satanic attack. We're the people that are intercessing on behalf of those who are suffering from demonic actions and activities and possessions. We call God. You know, we don't put ourselves up there and say, I'm on the front line, because that's an ego trip. And people who are humble before their Lord are not on ego trips. And God is telling these people, he says, let me be your God. You know, I jump ahead, but he says, I think I marked it. Well, I'll come to it. But anyway, he says, I will do the fighting. I'll take care of this. Now, before I get too far and lost into this, look at chapter 31. Here he talks about the succession of Moses, and Joshua will succeed him. And because of that, we sometimes skip over something I think is rather interesting in the very first verse. So Moses continued to speak the words to all Israel, and he said to them, I'm 120 years old today. Well, happy birthday, Moses. Did you ever know that we know Moses' birthday? Well, the problem is we don't know what day this is. And he says, I'm no longer able to go out and come in. So 120 years old, I guess, yeah, that's pretty old. The only contradiction of that is, if you turn to the very last chapter of the book, in chapter 34, it says in verse 7, Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were undimmed and his vigor unabated. Well, not according to Moses. He said, I'm having trouble getting around, a little down on my back, and I'll see so good. But I thought, we never think about simple things like birthdays. It was Moses' birthday that day. You know, and what's he doing? He's getting up and telling people, I'm retiring today. So it's a retirement party and a birthday party.
He should have retired 2 times. And he didn't.
And his retirement gift is not a pocket watch.
Mm.
His retirement gift is now you get to die. And the Lord has said to me, you shall not go over this Jordan. And Lord God says that he will go over before you. He will destroy the nations before you so that you will dispossess them. And Joshua will go over at your head as the Lord spoken. Look down at verse 6 and then look down at verse 7. You'll see 2 phrases that pop up a lot. Be strong and courageous. Then down below, be strong and courageous. That's almost a theme song of Joshua, because Joshua will say that, be strong and courageous. We even made a hymn about it. Be strong and be of good courage for you, whatever. So Moses is telling him sort of goodbye, and he said, I'm passing the mantle on to Joshua, but there's always that one last thing I want you to do. And this is over in verse 9. And Moses wrote the law and gave it to the priests, the sons of Levi, who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and to the elders of Israel. And if you jump from there over to verse 26, you see, take this book of the law and put it by the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God. So we know that the law is going into the ark. We knew that already, but here he's making it official. But he does something here. He says in verse 10, back over, and Moses commanded them, at the end of every 7 years, at the set time in the year of release, at the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God at the place that he will choose, which will be the temple, you shall read this law before all Israel in their hearing. Assemble the people, men, women, and little ones, and the sojourner, there's that sojourner again, within your own towns, that they may hear and learn to fear the Lord your God and be careful to do all the words of the law, and that their children who have not known it may hear and learn the fear of the Lord your God as long as you live in the land as you're going over to Jordan to possess. Now, this is set up, and it's still, well, it's not done like you'd think today, but this was a law. Every 7 years at the Feast of Tabernacles, you read the law. What is the law? These 5 books. And you read it to the whole people. It's a big convocation. And you read the law. When is the last time you've ever been anywhere where they read you the law? Anybody ever? I mean, you think, well, that's a religious thing. No, this is not a religious thing. It is and it isn't. That's something you need to realize. We have been studying the books of the law that God gave. Now, where did we get our law, our Constitution, and our laws? Where did that come from? You want to say the founding fathers? Okay. Where did they get it? Bible. This is another thing. I know you're probably tired of me getting them down on the soapbox. I always get on. But I get so frustrated at people that are trying to cancel the founding fathers. They say, well, they're just men. They were fallible. They made mistakes. And we need to look at the Constitution as fluid. You know, that drives me crazy. The Constitution is not a fluid document. The Declaration of Independence was not a fluid document. But it was basically just a declaration for rebellion. The Constitution is where we get our law. And we sort of do like they did. They had 10 laws. They branched out and came up with 666 laws. We have the Constitution. We've added a ton of amendments. And we have our civil laws. But what good are laws if we don't keep them? What's the point? And there's my soapbox issue. Y'all heard about the $450,000 payment to illegal aliens? Okay, so we are going to pay someone who broke the law $450,000. That drove me crazy. I thought, you can't be serious. But I guess we are, because on the issue of immigration, we have people that are breaking our laws, coming into our country illegally, and what are we doing? We're bringing them in, we're checking them over, we're putting them on a bus, sometimes on an airplane or in a hotel. We're sending them all over the country now. And most of the places they're going, the people that live there don't even know they're coming. 2,000 people show up in Minnesota at an airport on buses, by the way, not airplanes. And they're told, go to town, do whatever you want. You can be housed here for a while, and then we're going to find you some places to live. The people in that town didn't know who they were, didn't know they were coming. Turns out they don't speak English. So far, they've had 2 rapes by these people that are supposedly vetted, that were interpreters. They don't speak English. These stories bother me because it's flaunting the law and sort of rubbing your face in it. It's like, we're going to break the law, but we can't because we're in charge. If you or I were to go to another country and demand education and health and demand to be let into that country, we'd be arrested probably if we, I don't know if you remember the guy who went into Mexico in his pickup truck, just going across the border for the day, and forgot he had a .22 rifle in the back of his truck. Remember how long he spent in jail in Mexico for having a .22 rifle? It was close to a year, I think, before lawyers got him out because the president wouldn't get him out. That was Obama. He didn't like he wouldn't do anything. And the guy sat there. They were going to charge him with all kinds of things, being an international terrorist and stuff. He was an ex-military guy and just forgot he had a .22 rifle. Not like he's going to take over the world. We're looking at all this stuff about the January 6th insurrection. And this is a rebellion. This insurrection is the most dangerous day in the history of the country. Did anybody have a gun that day? If you're going to take over a country, you need to do it with weapons. They weren't armed. They were protesters, which, by the way, First Amendment gives them the right to do that. But now they're saying, we're going to bring you to trial. Guy from Kershaw, I think, was arrested.
Yep.
And I thought, Kershaw? Yeah. Did he have a gun? Oh, no, he didn't have a gun. How many people died that day? I've heard Nancy Pelosi say, this is the bloodiest day in American history. One. There were some people who died of heart attacks. They were on the other side. And they weren't even in the Capitol. There were 2 police officers, they said, were killed that day. No. They said he was, this one, they said, well, he's hit in the head by a fire extinguisher. Turned out that whole story was a lie. He had an aneurysm. He went back to his office and fell over dead. And they said, oh, the rioters killed him. 4 days later, the guy committed suicide. Oh, the rioters killed him. They actually, and they still do, they say there were 6 men killed that day, bloodiest day in history. Well, the only person killed in the Capitol that day was an ex-Air Force. I forget what her rank was. It was a girl, and she was shot through the neck. And to this day, we don't know who shot her because we're not going to release the name of the guy who shot her. Now, if it were the other way around, it's like, well, actually, they did pin medals onto people with the police. I'm just saying, the law was sort of weird there in that someone kills somebody and no charges are filed. They decide to drop any charges, and they won't tell who did it. Why? Well, because they can. This is what I'm talking about, lawlessness. I know I'm way too political with it, but God is saying, I give you the law for a reason. Keep the law, and I will bless you. Break the law, and I will curse you. Simple as that. I could sit here all morning probably, and you'd get bored, just reading the headlines of where the law in this country is being broken by the very people who swore to protect the law, to defend the law, to defend the Constitution and all this stuff. They all said, oh, I'm going to do this. And they're all lying to us. But that's some of my Facebook posts if you read my posts. It bothers me. Like I said, it's soapbox. I thought, Obama was the president who said, we are not a Christian nation. And everybody said, well, that's true. I thought, it doesn't have to be true. We are based on Christian foundations, Judeo-Christian law. That's what it's called, because those founding fathers, they got their ideas for the constitutional laws from the Bible, from the 10 Commandments. They said, we extrapolate this out. And it's not that this is unique. There's a lot of places in the world where it says, thou shalt not kill. We didn't just come up with that. It's common sense. Thou shalt not kill. That's murder. The Bible says murder, by the way. Because people say, well, they killed, they went to war, and what about our soldiers? The Bible doesn't say soldiers can't kill. They actually encourage them to fight when they were fighting against the enemy. The word used in the Bible is murder. Thou shalt not murder, and that's what it should say. But people like to parse it and say, oh, kill, that means we should all be pacifist. No, murder. And yet, we murder over 1 million children a year in this country. I know you don't want to hear me talk about abortion probably, but that's a soapbox issue for me that I can't get away from. And you've got the President of the United States sitting there talking with the Pope, and he comes back and the President said, the Pope said, I should receive communion because he's glad that I'm a good Catholic. You know, well, for one thing, you can't be a good Catholic and support abortion. I'm sorry. It's just not consistent. The bishops in this country have denied Biden, Pelosi, and several others communion because they said as long as you stand for abortion, we can in good faith give you communion. Now he's saying, well, the Pope said I could have it. Problem with that is the conversation with the Pope is confidential, so nobody knows what the Pope said, and he can never tell, so how do we know it's even true? But it's stuff like that that drive me crazy because we see our morals being evaporated, and we're canceling out the people who gave us these laws by saying they were slave owners. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration, his statue was taken down in the New York City Council. You probably saw that. I'm waiting for them to want to take down his Jefferson Memorial thing. What are they going to do with all that stuff? Because Washington had slaves, so he was, of course, evil. Robert E. Lee, we got to take that down because he had slaves. It wasn't because he was a Confederate general. It's because he was a slave owner. I don't know if you know anything about Robert E. Lee. Read a biography. That man had more morals than probably anybody else in the military. And we forget to mention, he was offered command of the Union Army before he was offered command of the Southern Army. So it's not like they didn't like the guy. I've read a biography, and I thought, this man was a model. And yet now he is removed and canceled. Why? Not because he led the armies of Northern Virginia, because he owned slaves. Jefferson owned slaves. Washington owned slaves. Matter of fact, just about everybody owned slaves. We have rewritten history to say that the crime committed in the late 1700s is now being punished today. But it wasn't a crime then. You know, it wasn't a good thing. Nobody ever said slavery was a good thing. But it was legal, and they did what was legal. They didn't see it as being illegal. Some did. Jefferson, as a matter of fact, when he wrote the Declaration, he said all men are created equal, and he pushed for abolishing slavery with the Declaration. And southern states, I'm sorry to say, South Carolina was one of the leading ones that said, we will not sign it if you try to abolish slavery, because we cannot survive. That was a key to the agricultural industry in the South, was having cheap labor. It's not good. It's an embarrassment. But you know what they did? They left it in because they said, we will work to get rid of slavery. And in 50 years they did. 60 years they did. 600,000 Americans died so that slaves could be free. And what do we hear today? All white people are bad because you're slave owners. You own slaves. My parents didn't own slaves. My grandparents didn't own slaves. I'm not even sure if maybe my great-grandparents weren't slaves. They came from Scotland to work off a debt. The laws we have, with the reading of the law, our feed went off, now it came back on. You folks you didn't miss anything. So anyway, here's the song, by the way. You skip over to chapter 32, and this is the song. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to sing it. But it goes on. And I do want to point out a couple of things in this song. He starts off with, give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth. May my teaching drop down as rain, my speech distill as dew. The gentle rain upon the tender grass, and like showers upon the earth, for I will proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God. That's very poetic, a nice lyric there. I'm not sure what the rhythm is. But after that, he brags on God, And it gets down to verse 7, he says, remember the days of old. And how many times have you said, remember the good old days? We say it all the time, but it's not that the past was so much better, because I'm glad we've got, flush toilets in our house now. How many of you ever used an outhouse? An outhouse.
Oh.
Yeah. I grew up and, we did have a toilet in our house, but when I visited my relatives, I always had to go to the outhouse. I hated visiting my relatives in wintertime. So I know the joys of an outhouse. I also know the sorrows of it. But those good old days weren't all that great. But there are a lot of things that we can sit back and get nostalgic about. I mean, I don't know why it is, but every time I get to my brothers, we talk about Mom's cooking. I guess that's just a thing. And I remember growing up, just to bore you even further, Mom cooked everything from scratch. And Grandma was right there in the kitchen with us. Grandma lived with us most of her life. And I give Debbie a hard time because Debbie occasionally makes biscuits, but she makes them like her mother, and they're like this thick. My mom's biscuits were like this thick. And Grandma had a round dish that she made biscuits, and she put them all around the edge, and right in the middle there was a biscuit this size. One day she called it a calf's head biscuit, and then one she called it a cat's head biscuit. And I thought, wait a minute, is it a cat or a calf? Because I don't want to eat a calf biscuit. But everybody struggled to get that biscuit, because it was like the size of a platter. But those are the best things in the world. In the fall, we had a garden, and we'd bring in the beans and the corn and all kinds of stuff. And what was tedious at the time, I would trade anything to go back and do it now. And that was to sit on the back porch, shuck corn and snap beans with Mom and Grandma. And then Dad would come in, he'd pull up a chair, and pretty soon all of us sitting there snapping beans and shucking corn. And I knew what was coming next, because two things. Mom would cook the corn, she's going to can some, and I would sit in that kitchen, and for every ear she put on that pile, which was high as a pyramid, I'd eat two. And I'd just sit there with a butter stick in my hand, eating her corn, and she never said a word. And then after that, we shucked the corn, and then we took it off the cob and made vegetable soup and put up like 1 million jars. And we lived off of it all winter. And that was where I thought, if I see one more jar of soup, I'm going to die. Today, I'd kill to get a jar of that soup. That's the good old days. That's the nostalgic things that you enjoy when, Christmas time, you didn't go to Walmart and buy one of those pre-lit trees. You went in the woods and chopped down a cedar bush, and sprinkled icicles on it and picked the ticks off later. But it was so wonderful. And it's great to have those times to look back on. And he says, remember the days of old. Now, when the Jews, or I should say the Israelites or the Hebrews, remember the days of old, they didn't go all the way back to Egypt. That's not a good memory. They remember the days that God walked with them, spoke to them, that they ate manna. All that's great. At the time, they hated the manna. They were so sick of manna. I would look at something, a banana sandwich instead of a manna sandwich. But now, later, they think, remember the good old days. Remember when God provided us manna and those quail would just be laying on the ground? We ate quail and manna, and God was there, and Moses was there, and we see the Shekinah glory. God says, remember those days. Instead, they go into the promised land. The next thing you know, they're chasing after prostitutes and temple prostitutes and doing all kinds of stuff. And that's what this song is about. Moses tells them, read the law every 7 years and then teach everybody this song. Anybody know a song you were taught in school that everybody was taught? This help you learn. Frère Jacques. That's help you learn French. I learned that one. But there's one you'll say, oh yeah, of course. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. That's how we learned our alphabet. So there's songs that we're taught. And as I was studying music, I found that music is one of the key elements to elementary studies. Kids learn by singing better than anything. And guess what? They want to take that out. It's weird because I've taught music in schools. I said I'll never teach in elementary school. That's like going into a minefield. Those little kids will get you. But I've taught music in schools, and I found probably the funniest thing was we were talking about cutting back on the arts. one year in a middle school, and the principal said, well, man, I have a choral program. I said, really? She said, yeah, we're cutting back on some of the arts, but we're doing some new things. Come to the meeting, we're going to show you. So went into this meeting, they said, here's what we're going to spend our money on. It's called the Cow, and it's a computer that looked like a cow, and it was on a big stand and stuff. And they said, everybody's going to get a cow. We may have to share with some of the other classes, but it teaches math and English and stuff like that. And they said, let's demonstrate it. They turned the cow on, and it's got a built-in projector. It shines up on the wall, and what's the first thing it does? Sings songs. So they go to English class, sing songs to learn letters. They wrote songs about conjugating verbs. I'm sitting there thinking, oh yeah, I need to get rid of the choral program. Singing songs about math. They had a whole series of math raps. Everything in the cow, this is singing cow. Every lesson, history lessons, get the cow. And I'm sitting there, and Miss Blair, I loved her, she was a sweet little lady. She looked back at me, she said, maybe we better keep the choral program. I said, that's probably a good idea. The arts, people learn more through the arts than through any other stuff. But that's my plug for that. But they're doing the same thing here. Teach them a song. And what's the purpose? Remind them. Remind them of who you are. And also, and this is the sad part, it reminds them of the problems you're going to run into. Like, look, for instance, verse 17 in the song. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, the gods they had never known. They knew that. I'm just making that part up. But it's like they're saying, here's why you have problems. You followed the demons. You skip on down and it says, I will spin my arrows on them. They shall be wasted with hunger and devoured by the plague and poisonous pestilence. I'll send the teeth of beast against them and the venom of things that crawl in. It's like, let's change the song. What happened to Happy Birthday? But they learned this song in verse 26. I will wipe them from human memory. Golly, this is just such a real upper. I'm sure it's written in a minor key though. And it goes on and on. And then it turns around. And it's like God saying in verse 37, he said, then he will say, where are the gods in the rock in which you took refuge? Who ate the fat of the sacrifices and drank the wine of the drink offerings? Let them rise up and help you. Let them be your protection. And God is saying, all these things you did, all these gods you went after, they didn't save you. I did. And here is, I think, one of the major themes, because this little phrase that I'm about to read you pops up later in the Bible at various places. He says in verse 39, see now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God beside me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal, and there is none that can deliver out of my hand. For I lift my hand to heaven and swear as I live forever. Remember that. And by the way, when you have problems, and we have problems, we're talking about family members passing away. We're talking about cancer, it's that shadow behind me all the time. And it's like, okay, I don't have it right now, but I know it's coming back. My doctor said, Brooks, you have terminal cancer. She said, you don't have it right now, but it's coming back. I said, when? She said, who knows? I thought, well, thanks. But this type of cancer I got never goes away. I can keep it at bay. And she said, 2 months, 10 years, who knows? She said, but barring anything else, you will die of this someday. And I thought, well, let's light a candle for that one and have some cupcakes. But I mean, that's the reality that I get to deal with the rest of my life. But for some reason, I'm not bragging, but for some reason, I don't worry about it that much. And I think it's because of the Bible, because I trust God. Debbie and I were talking last night when we read all the stuff, and she said, well, you're good so far. She said, what about COVID? I don't know if y'all know this, but I'm not vaccinated. I'm not planning on getting vaccinated. I won't spoil you with all my reasons because people think I'm evil. I got a dirty letter from my doctor yesterday about why I should take the shot. But I have faith, and I have my own body. I got cancer, yeah. But you know what? Cancer will only kill me when God decides it's time for me to go. And then I sort of hope he doesn't do like he did Moses and say, hey, Moses, today's the day you're going to die. What do you think? Just don't tell me, Lord. I'll take it as a surprise. But I believe, my faith tells me that God is in control of my life. I have surrendered that to him. It is his. He can take it whenever he wants. And I found out yesterday he's decided to give me a few more, who knows what, days, months, years. I'd like to have some more years. I got 2 grandchildren that really need me, because who's going to give them candy? But, I mean, and I had one of my brothers, he's he worries about things, and he said, how do you do this? How do you face this? I said, it's really odd you should ask, because I don't know. Only thing I can tell you is I believe in God. I put it in his hands. And I've heard people say that before, and I thought, yeah, you can. If you really trust God. Now, I've told you guys, I sin like everybody else, but God is faithful to me, and I'm trying to be faithful to him. So the people of Israel failed, but God tells me, he says, I kill, but I make alive. In other words, I control both ends of the spectrum. If someone dies, it's because I allowed it to happen. If someone lives, because I allowed it to happen. Now, when I think about that, I think doctors can say what they want, but God's the one. As a pastor, I don't know why this was, but I buried more people than I married. I always wanted to do it the other way around. It means I spent a lot of time in hospice too, and that's depressing. But every time I came out of hospice, I thought, they'd say, he's only got a few hours. And I thought, you don't know that. And I'll tell you this, I ran into a lot of places where the hospice said, we're calling in hospice, that's it. And then it's like, we're calling out hospice, he's pulling back. And they live. And it's like they're disappointed. Like, sorry, he lived. But it just reaffirms the fact that I believe God is in control. And the message we get from this, and here's one I'm going to skip through. The rest of this thing, chapter 33, Moses is giving a blessing to 10 of the 12 tribes. Not to all 12, because 2 of them, by the way, have already stayed on the other side, so they don't get a blessing. There's a few things in here you might worry about. I mean, verse 48 of chapter 32, Moses finds out he's going to die again. I'm sure he's tired of hearing that. They talk about things like the Urim and the Thummim, which were stones that Moses had to translate, and we don't know anything about that other than it may be an Egyptian stone. But he gave them to the Levites, the Urim and Thummim. The Mormons made a big deal out of it and said that those are stones where you look at them and you can read foreign languages. I don't know. We don't have them today. But anyway, everybody gets a blessing in chapter 34, the death of Moses. And I read you part of it, but basically it just says he went up to Mount Nebo, got to see the land. God says, this is where they're going, but you can't go. We've talked about why he didn't get to go. And we can talk about it some more if you want to, but basically Moses was not a perfect man. And in his heart, he did not give God the glory at the waters of Meribah. And so God says, because of that. And that's the reason God gives him. But I have to think, maybe there's another reason. And the reason relates back to that. And that was the people had become to where they were worshiping Moses more than God. And so God had to remove Moses so that people could see God again. And they didn't do it to Joshua. But Moses was like a god to them. They even say that none like him for all the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt to Pharaoh. He's got a reputation. There's none like Moses. But what did Moses say? Moses said, I see one. He's not near. He's far off. He was talking about Jesus. Jesus says that. And I think it's in John where Jesus says, Moses saw me and foretold my coming. So we have that. But that is the end of Deuteronomy. Now, what we have just studied for the past forever are the law, that first section. Jesus knew the law. The law is different than the rest of these books because the Hebrews divided up. The law was the law. This was the history and the prophets and things like that. So when you see Jesus talking about the law, as Jesus said, by the way, I'll not remove anything from the law. Now, that's something we ought to think about. Jesus kept this law. Today, we have preachers, we have politicians, all grabbing parts and saying, we don't need that anymore. That doesn't apply to us. We're above that. We're better than that. But Jesus kept the law. He said, I'm not going to take a single thing out of it. And people say, well, Jesus was all about grace. Jesus was all about law and grace. He followed the law. He wanted us to follow the law. And then he gave grace through his own ability and his own power. There is a bit of a contradiction because what the law says to do, God's grace will take away from you. When I stand before God at judgment, I will not have a lawyer. I will have an advocate. Because when God looks at me and says, well, Brooks, you did pretty good, but then my advocate's going to say, object. No buts here. He's been cleared. Because Jesus said, I will be your advocate. I will stand for you. And all that you have done wrong, and I apologize every time I have a prayer by myself, and I say, Lord, I'm so sorry for what I did to you on that cross. Because he died on that cross and was punished for what I was going to do 1,000 years later, 2,000 years later. But he did it knowing full well what I was going to do. The sin in my life, he saw it, and he said, I'm going to die so that Brooks doesn't have to suffer for this. So when he stands before judgment, I will simply point to the cross and say, I've already taken the punishment for his sin. And that is the beauty of salvation through Jesus Christ. And I wish the whole world could believe it. I've gone over again, folks. Can you believe that? It's hard to believe it's going to go past time. Yes.
Just so you know, I got a message during class that my cousin had died.
We're very sorry to hear that. But again, God is in control of all situations.
We knew that last night.
Yeah.
And she knew where she was going, so we're all happy about it. She was talking about going to see my mama and her mama. And,
Yeah.
so,
The homecoming.
and she couldn't wait. She was like, I can't wait.
Well, I'd love to keep you longer, but we got to go. So let's have a word of prayer. I'll let you guys go to church. Heavenly Father, I come praising you, God, and I can't praise you enough. I am so minor and insignificant in the great scheme of eternity, and yet you love me. I have felt that for so long. All my life I've felt your presence, and I thank you so much, and I praise you that a great God can look down on an insignificant man and love him as you've loved me and helped me. And I pray your forgiveness, Lord, for my weakness, for my sins. Lord, you've heard us today as we've tried to expound upon the law, and also as we've shared the needs of our lives, the problems of our life. And Lord, even one that's passed away that's with you now. And we give praise that they are with you. And we help, or we ask for help in dealing with our absence of grief and the grief of absence, however you want to say that. Because, Lord, we know that you do kill, but you do heal. So I pray for your healing for this family and for others that are facing some pretty tough times, Lord. Again, I ask you to forgive us for our weakness. Again, I ask you to help us to be the people you want us to be, that we can remember our good old days and look forward to the days to come when we will see you as you are and we will be like you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you so much.
If y'all have any ideas or suggestions for our future lessons, I'm open.